Welcome to Season 2, Episode 17 of the podcast, Ghosts, Demons, and Murder Oh My. My name is Hayden Crook, and I'll be your host for today's episode on the Min Min Lights. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Source 1, ABC News via Molly Hunt. Min Min Lights are a mysterious phenomenon that have spooked many people in the outback of Australia. But is there any scientific proof that Min Min Lights exist? Or is it simply an Aboriginal folktale that has been passed down for generations? The lights had been described by witnesses as floating, fast moving balls of color that glow in the night sky and stalk people, leaving some feeling confused and frightened. Sometimes the lights are blue, and other times they are white or yellow. In Queensland, the Boolia Shire Council notifies visitors, in the interest of tourism, that they are in the land of the Min Min lights, and that they may spot them as they drive for the next 120 kilometers. In the in the Kimberley in Western Australia, some Aboriginal people believe the Min Min lights are the spirits of elders. As a kid growing up, the old people used to tell me they, Min Min lights, were old people's spirits looking after the country, Wyndham local James Birch said. Mr. Birch, a Balangara ranger, said everyone from his childhood grew up hearing the stories. If you've lived in the Kimberley, if you lived in the Kimberley, you would have experienced spotting a Min Min light once in your life, he said. Mr. Birch has not seen the Min Min light for 2 years, but said the lights tend to distract people and take them off their chosen path. We were heading back into town after hunting. I was driving towards town when all of a sudden a Min Min light appeared, he said. We all stared at the light, and all of a sudden we were going in the opposite way, going back into the bush and following the light without even realizing. What does science say? Curtis Roman, a senior lecturer at Charles Darwin University, is gathering stories from Indigenous Australians about Min Min lights as part of an ongoing research project. Dr. Roman said there were several scientific theories that could explain the phenomenon. One is that they are a mirage caused by natural gases or warm air and cold coming together, Dr. Roman said. Some of the other theories are that they are bioluminescent insects, owls, or birds. Although he's only in the early stages of his research, Dr. Roman said that all the indigenous people he'd interviewed so far had described how frightened they felt when they saw the lights. Outback Lights star in movie. From young age writer and director Jub Clerk heard the tales about the Min Min lights and how they would follow people and take them if they stopped to watch the lights. 2015, Miss Clerk directed a short film called Min Min Lights based upon her own experiences of the lights when she was growing up in the Pilbara. When I was a little girl lying in my backyard, these lights came down, Miss Clerk said. Two of them came down in front of me and then suddenly shot off. I was in awe. It could be spirits that look after the country. Who knows what it is? I like to think there's more to life than what we think. Source 2 is the University of Queensland, and this is an old article from like 2002, 2003. So this was like the only thing I could find though, like for science based, because there was plenty of like evidence and research done on like a spiritual, religious, folklore level. Like, so I was trying to look for some like a balance, and this is really the only thing I found. University of Queensland neuroscientist has revealed the probable cause or the probable basis of a bizarre Australian outback phenomenon that has baffled observers and scientists for centuries. The Western Queensland town of Boolia has built its tourist reputation on Min Min lights, mysterious lights that seem to follow travelers for long distances. Professor Jack Pettigrew said, despite intense interest in the Min Min, they had never been explained in a satisfactory way. The Min Min lights seem to have magical qualities, sometimes following observers even as they speed away in vehicles, while at other times seeming to retreat shyly, he said. Professor Pettigrew, who is the director of UQ's Vision, Touch, and Hearing Research Center, provides an optical explanation and data about Min Min lights in the current edition of Clinical and Experimental Optometry, the Journal of the Optometrists Association of Australia. He used his skills in the vision sciences, combined with extensive first-hand experience of the Di- Diamantina region of western Queensland. Professor Pettigrew was studying an elusive nocturnal bird, the letter-winged kite in the region, when he encountered the phenomenon. The Min-Min light occurs when light from a natural or man-made source is refracted to an observer who is tens or even hundreds of kilometers away by an inverted mirage or fata morgana, he said. Named after the Morgan fairy, who was reputed to be able to conjure cities on the surface of the sea ice, the fata morgana is a real physical phenomenon being caused by a temperature inversion. A cold, dense layer of air next to the ground, or sea ice, carries light far over the horizon to a distant observer without the usual dissipation and radiation, to produce a vivid mirage that baffles and enchants because of its unfamiliar optical properties. In a celebrated and authenticated example, the Irish sea cliffs were seen floating in vivid greens and browns above the calm Atlantic by observers on a ship more than 1,000 kilometers away. Wonderful during the day, such fata morgana can be terrifying at night when a single light source gives no hint that it is actually part of a mirage emanating from a great distance. Even hardened outback observers can break down what they are unable to interpret, the unusual optical properties of the light in terms of their own very different past experiences. The unusual terrain of the channel country, makes the favorable atmospheric conditions more likely, while its isolation increases the impact of a single light source, since the observer knows that it cannot be produced locally but sees it apparently there in front. Professor Pettigrew said some people would prefer not to have the Min-Min's mystique probed by city slickers. I apologize to them, however, knowing more about the unusual weather conditions responsible could improve one's chances of seeing it, he said. Increased knowledge has certainly not lessened my own wonderment at the phenomenon on those infrequent occasions I've witnessed it. Source 3, Old Australian History via Anna O'Reilly. Water break real quick. One of the most unusual mysteries in Australia are the famous Min-Min lights. Described as large glowing balls of light that dance or float just above the ground. They've been witnessed by tens of thousands of people. They are seen moving rapidly, floating, or just remaining perfectly still. They glow like giant orbs and sometimes hover before disappearing, as though someone has blown them out. I've been interested in these lights for years, so have queried people about seeing them while we've been traveling through Outback, South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, and the Northern Territory. About 1 in 4 long-term Outback residents seems to have witnessed them, but it also seems to be a disappearing phenomenon. It is my belief that the sightings are diminishing in recent years, with most being before 1990. I have no idea why this would be so, and I would love to be proved wrong. Over the years, scientists have tried to explain the lights using a number of theories: phosphorescent gases released from underground sources, flocks of insects coated with bioluminescent particles from fungi, but the Fata Morgana mirage theory holds the most credibility. A Fata Morgana is a complex mirage where air passes through a thermal inversion and light is bent. The area around Boulia and the Channel Country provides perfect conditions for this type of event, but so too do many other parts of Australia and the world. The big problem I see with this theory is that most Fata Morgana mirages overseas seem to occur during daylight hours. They show mountain ranges, boats, harbors, and even cities, yet I haven't found any reports of similar styles of mirages like this in outback Australia. You never hear of phantom sand dunes hovering in the sky or upside down road trains as a Fata Morgana would normally produce. The second issue I have with this type of mirage theory is that, as any outback traveler can testify to, that if these lights are a reflection of headlights and that most of the roads on which these lights were seen are deeply corrugated, especially in days gone by, then the orbs should be jiggling and jumping all over the place. They should not be floating sedately and serenely along. If we're talking a single light which remains stationary, which some do, then it is very plausible as a mirage of the moon or the reflection of a light from a station homestead. But when the orb moves rapidly and floats, questions remain about that theory. There are many books with eyewitness accounts, but not much of the history of the Min Min Hotel. Many people who see these lights believe they've witnessed a UFO sighting, as the orbs movement is so unusual. It is only after they've spoken about it with others that they relax and begin to understand what a widespread phenomenon it is. I can't comment on any of these things, but decided to investigate the historical reason the lights were given their name, and along the way made a rather interesting discovery about a tragic Australian woman. Whether it has anything to do with where they originated from, I'll leave that to you to decide. On the 20th of December, 1934, a poem was widely published in the newspapers. This is the poem which I believe led to the notoriety of the Min Min lights. Written by D.B. O'Connor, it follows the story of a horseman who tells the tale of riding near the Min Min Hotel when he sees a phosphorescent bird and becomes frightened. So I bolted as the Kaiser, and he rides nonstop all the way into the nearest town, which I believe was meant to be Bulia. As his poem was released across the country, more and more reports of the lights spread, but the area around the Min Min Hotel was the center of the greatest activity. Although there are some sightings of the lights pre-1930s, most are after the poem was published, and by then they are widely reported in newspapers as being seen over the graves at the back of the ruins of the Min Min Hotel. The hotel site is just off the road between Boulia and Middleton, Channel Country, Queensland. Built in the early 1880s, the hotel was a stopover for the Cobb and Co. coach as it made its way from the remote stations at Boulia to Winton. One of the first hotel keepers was William Thomas Cobley Lilly, whose wife died in 1897 and is buried along the creek from the hotel site. Her grave is well kept, very different from the graves behind the ruins of the old shanty known as the Min Min. It was in 1889 that James Collins, a laborer, died of thirst on the road near the Min Min Hotel. The weather had been unbearably hot, with temperatures recorded at Winton of 114 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius. During this period in history, when people died, they were buried near the nearest human habitation. James died within 4 miles of the hotel, and at the back of the hotel was a common practice. It's pretty safe to think he might have been one of the first burials behind the Min Min. William Lilly held onto the license until 1912 when he handed it over to Jane McMillan. Jane is very mysterious. She's only around for a short while, and then she seems to simply disappear after she hands over to Agnes Evelyn Hasted in 1915. I've done extensive research on Jane McMillan, but to no avail. It is possible that she passed away and was buried at the back of the hotel site. Agnes is the woman who interests me the most. When Agnes took over the hotel, she had already lived a difficult and tumultuous life. Her early years were spent as a domestic servant in the UK before heading out to Australia with her brother. In the lead up to the purchase of the hotel, she had lived many years in the district and she registered stock brands, so must have been involved in the breeding of cattle. Agnes had her first dealing with death near the Min Min when she helped William Lilly during the tragic death of his wife in 1897, and then shortly after, her brother in law was all over the newspapers. He had murdered his wife while his children slept beside, and then attempted to take his own life. Life dealt Agnes her first personal blow in 1898 when her 9-year-old son was lost at Thompson's Tank next door to the Min Min Hotel. He was found barely alive, but so badly eaten by ants that he perished on the way to Boulia. It was within a few years that I can find the earliest written or documented references about the lights. The notes were published in a newspaper in 1926 and suggested it was 1902 when they were first seen in the district. The article goes on to say that they were again witnessed in 1914 when kangaroo shooters let off their rifles at the lights with no reaction. Just prior to that, in 1912, Agnes had lost another child by the name of Horace Frederick Hasted, aged 4. By 1915, Agnes had taken over the license and ran the hotel on a shoestring. Some newspaper reports refer to the hotel as a shanty, giving the appearance of being somewhat disreputable. Most of the time, Agnes ran the hotel with only the help of a domestic servant, although her son Lionel lived on site. She and her husband had split, and he had moved to Winton, where he worked as a carrier. In the beginning, the domestic servant was a girl by the name of Mary Matheson, who vanished about 1916. It's possible that she lies in another one of the graves out the back and may even be the source of some of the very interesting tales that surround the hotel during the time. It was reputed that one of the ladies at the hotel would make sure that the menfolk were always comfortable during their stay. It was after this that Agnes's daughter-in-law Gladys joined her in running the hotel. And then again, tragedy struck Agnes and her family. Agnes had only one relative in Australia, a brother by the name of Harry Springthorpe, sorry, who was working on a nearby Warrenda station. In October of 1917, he and a number of others were employed in fighting a bushfire. The buggy that they were on became encircled by lightning and was in long grass. The men got out and ran, but fire overtook them. When found the next morning, they were still alive, but described as having been roasted. Harry and another died before the Cobb and Co. coach could get them to the hospital in Boulia. After the inquest, it was stated that the men were buried in Boulia, but I could find no mention of Harry's grave in the records of gravestones. The fact that Agnes had a private graveyard behind her hotel and that he was her only sibling makes me think that she would have wanted his body close by. It is very possible that he is in another of the unmarked graves. It was only a few years later that lightning and fire comes again to haunt Agnes, takes her livelihood and leaves nothing but ruins and graves to mark the spot where 40 years previously stood a beautiful new country hotel. On February 22nd, 1924, a huge storm came through the area. The railway was washed away between Hughenden and Winton. Sorry. There were many reports of lightning strikes. Shortly after came the news that the Midman Hotel had been destroyed by fire. Agnes's life didn't end there. She moved to Townsville, but was a regular visitor back to her son's establishment, the nearby Hamilton Hotel. From all accounts, this hotel was a much better place of business. It regularly raised money for the hospital in Boulia, was a place for excursions for the nearby townsfolk, and held country athletic meetings in the sports ground behind the hotel. But Agnes's life of tragedy was not over yet. In 1922, her son Henry John died, aged 26, with another son's wife dying at 23 years old and another daughter at the age of 30. Agnes then took on the raising of her grandchild. In 1953, Agnes passed away and was buried in the same area that is famous for the lights. Her grave is at the Hamilton Hotel ruins, right next door to the remnants of the Minmin Hotel. The story of Agnes and the Minmin Hotel seem to be one of fire and grief, and the lights of the Minmin are quite prevalent during the period of Agnes's reign. There's no question about the lights being seen all over Outback Australia later, but I am just looking at the death and tragedy surrounding this one woman, the era in which we have documented evidence of those first sightings, and the area which gave the lights their name, the Min Min Hotel. Source 4, my last one for this episode, is Trove. This is a newspaper article with the poem that was mentioned from, let me see his name real quick, D.B. O'Connor. So the poem goes, The light o' Min Min. There's a shanty west o' Winton, where in thought I love to linger. Through 1,000 leagues it beckons, by a fertile billabong. Down the vistas of my dreaming, I can see a fairy finger, pointing to its hospitality, its happiness and song. I've a yearning for such places, as around the world I wander. There are many habitations that I cherish in fond thought, but far more than any others, I shall often pause to ponder on a posse west o' Winton, and the pleasure that it brought. Close at hand, die lonely Minmin. There's a bird that's phosphorescent. Every drover says it's dinkum. With his hand upon his breast, he will swear it dips its feather in some mixture incandescent, and its luster lights the ridges through the darkness of the west. Being curious for knowledge, I went out investigating. 'Twas a night of moonless blackness, till I saw that eerie glow, in a misty halo floating. As I sat there contemplating, then there came 1,000 furies, when the wind began to blow. But I rubbed mine eyes and steadied, lest my eight should be in error, when there rose a giant with his woomera and spear, and he danced in savage frenzy, like a maniac of terror. So I bolted as the Kaiser, at full gallop for the rear. I was standing in the stirrups, leaning over on the shoulders. of my Brumby as I whipped him in a way I'd hate to tell, crashing somehow through the hazards, cracking star shots from the boulders at a speed to beat the devil with a profiteer for hell. But the bogies still pursued me, and I could feel them grasp behind me. No courage knows the daring that is recklessness of fear. So I bounded through the gibeahs that came swishing up to bind me, till the home post raced to meet me, pouring on to disappear. Then I saw that tavern looming where the lamps were barely beaming, and my cobbers came out cheering. They had heard me flying in pajamas they'd arisen, and their laughter rose to screaming, and a bar of flowing measures on the stock route from Min Min. In my calmer recollections, I have found no sane conclusion, nor by any sort of logic can explain the thing at all. But I'll swear it's neither fancy nor an ocular delusion. There is a light in Western Queensland that is supernatural, and a shanty west of Winton still stands highest on my tally of the many pleasant places that imagination courts, with its vintages so welcome and abundance in the gallery, where the women live for laughter and the men are dinkum sports. D.B. O'Connor. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Ghosts, Demons, and Murder Oh My. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can get all the updates, information, and content that will be uploaded. Thank you for the support and for listening to my podcast. Episode ideas or recommendations are welcome. And as always, I can be reached via email at haydencrook8@gmail.com.